For the mother of a murdered son, a small change in the law could make a life or death difference for other parents who fear for their adult children. Fiona's autistic son, Christopher, was killed in his own home by a criminal who had exploited him. She's now fighting for other families' concerns to be acted on, a campaign supported by MPs from all three major parties. But will the government listen? I'm Geraint Vincent, and this is What You Need to Know. Well, joining me are political correspondent Romilly Weeks and senior politics producer Elisa Menendez, who've been reporting on what is, we should warn listeners and viewers, a very distressing story. First off, just tell me about Christopher Lascaris and the sort of person he was.
Geraint, as you say, it's such a sad story, this, and it ended so tragically, but really Christopher's life should have been so very different. As his mother told us, he was a very sweet boy. He was very talented. He was a good musician. He was incredibly caring. He loved animals. He was the kind of person who, if he saw a lamb separated from its mother, he would make his mum stop the car so that they could help it out. And he was clever enough to get a place at university, and he very much wanted to do that. And what really burned out to both of us, I think, when we were interviewing his mother in their house where he grew up, surrounded by photographs of him, was how much he was loved and how much his mother fought to protect him and how she was really blocked at every turn, because Christopher was also on the autistic spectrum. He had bipolar, and that made it very difficult for him to live safely, independently, even though that was what he wanted. And what he needed, but what he failed to get, was a mental capacity assessment, which is the assessment that you were given to determine whether you were capable of making decisions safely for yourself. And because he wasn't given that, he wasn't given the support that he needed to live independently. And that, as we found out, led to these really terrible, tragic consequences.
Okay, so what went wrong in the management of his case?
So there were lots of failings in Christopher's case, but the issue that kept coming up time and time again was this issue of not being given a mental capacity assessment. You know, there was so much proof to show that Christopher was really struggling to live independently. You know, he attempted suicide. He was a victim of theft. On another occasion, he accidentally set fire to his flat and he had to be rescued by emergency services. He was exploited and assaulted in the community numerous times. So there was so much evidence here to show that he was really struggling. And Fiona, his mum, felt as though she was essentially shouting into a void for years, saying he desperately needs some support. But he was just never given a mental capacity assessment. And she thoroughly believes if he had been given one, that he would have received the support he so clearly needed.
And I think it's worth explaining about these assessments, because it's really complicated, and we had to go over it a number of times, didn't we, when we were trying to work out how to explain it really clearly to people, because the law as it stands means that people are presumed to have the capacity to make their own decisions. Right. And that is important because that has stopped, for example, people being sectioned against their will. But where there is any doubt over that capacity, they are supposed to be given an assessment. And it's often family members who are raising those doubts, and it's family members who, in too many cases, are being ignored. And that's where the problem is happening.
Right, but I mean, one of the challenges for medical professionals would be, I assume, in the kind of scenario you're describing, Romilly, would be that if you ask somebody like Christopher if he's okay, one of the unfortunate circumstances of the conditions he lives with is that sometimes he can present as perfectly fine and he'll say he's fine, right?
Well, exactly. And that's what charities have told us. So this affects people with numerous conditions. So it can be learning difficulties, it can be mental health conditions, it can be autism, it can be bipolar. And Christopher, for example, as his mother explained to us, was very eager to please, and he was also wanting to make friends. And so if a professional asked him, are you able to live on your own? He would say yes, because he thought that that was the answer that they wanted to hear. And because, you know, as we know, social services, the NHS are very stretched. It's often easier to say, right, this person doesn't need support. He's saying he's fine.
And a mental capacity assessment can be, it gives them the opportunity for a medical professional to say, okay, we know that's what you're saying to us, but we're just going to dig
We're going to
deeper.
investigate,
Right.
yeah.
And it's not just a medical professional, it can be a social worker,
Right.
it can be a care worker. It's basically anybody who would be responsible for a vulnerable adult's care. It says in the Code of Practice that if a person's capacity is in doubt, then they should have an assessment. But the problem is the Code of Practice is being misapplied and misinterpreted. And essentially this idea of what is a presumption of capacity, it can fluctuate at different times. There's lots of cases where people should be having them but aren't, because perhaps in that moment, they're taken at face value and they seem fine. As Romilly said, that's what happened with Christopher. He was eager to please people, and some people perhaps are a bit scared of what, that could entail if they say, yes, I do need support. So it's something that shouldn't just be taken at face value, but it is in that moment.
And all of this had terrible consequences for Christopher and his family.
Yeah, that's right. Christopher and Fiona and Christopher's sister went through hell for years because Christopher had repeated problems. As you were saying earlier on, he accidentally set fire to his flat. He was often falling in with people who were exploiting him. And it ended up with a convicted criminal eventually murdered him. And I don't think I'll ever forget Fiona telling me what happened, setting it out for me as she tried not to sob. I think it's worth hearing from her.
They were exploiting him, and he came back a few weeks later, gained access to his flat, and stabbed him through the heart. And Christopher was left just dying on the floor. So I rang up the police and asked for a welfare check, and that was when they went round and found him inside, and he'd been lying there for 2 weeks. Like he was just someone that no one cared about. But, I just tried everything I could for years and years.
I mean, you really feel the extent, the enormity of her pain there, and she had tried absolutely everything, and that feeling of her son, her loved son, being left to die alone, and the reason that she hadn't been able to contact him for so long was that sometimes he would go off the radar and he wouldn't answer calls. And the only way that she had of getting in touch with him was to try and get a social worker to go round or to get police to go round.
Oh, gosh, just in an unbearable position, wasn't she?
Yeah.
And this is after years and years and years of her fighting, saying she knew that it would essentially end in tragedy. She was trying her best to prevent it, but she was essentially powerless. And that despair and frustration comes across so strongly when you speak to her, doesn't it? I mean, her grief and her trauma, it's palpable every time you speak to her. And essentially, I don't think she's really grieved the loss of her son, because she's been desperately trying to get some sort of answers and justice for him, hasn't she? And it's just
yeah, she said to us, losing a child is the worst thing that can happen to you, but an avoidable death adds just extra pain.
And I guess also that feeling all the time that, she's inevitably asking herself, what more could I have done? And that's part of the pain you see in her face, isn't it? You mentioned that she's doing other work, and that the grieving process is being put on hold in a sense. Elisa, what is she calling for in terms of legislation, I should say?
So it's actually quite a small change in the law that she is asking for, backed by 3 cross-party MPs and the National Autistic Society, but it would make a really big difference to families in this situation. And essentially, it gives families or, any loved ones the opportunity to raise the alarm if they're concerned about a loved one's well-being and to request a mental capacity assessment. So in theory, this should already be, something that's happening, you know, if somebody's capacity is in doubt, they should be having an assessment already. But the problem is, this is not enshrined in law. It's just in the code of practice.
Sort of like a loophole that needs closing.
Essentially, yeah.
There's an interesting happenstance, I know, Romilly, in this story about how Fiona managed to kind of begin that gathering of political support.
She has cross-party support, as Elisa was saying, but one of the first MPs who supported her is a Liberal Democrats MP called Chris Coglin. And the reason he heard about her story was that he actually grew up in the house that was then bought by Fiona and where Christopher then grew up. And he went back to the house to look round it because his mother had actually died shortly after he was born, and he wanted to get a sense of his mother. And he said to her, well, I'm thinking of becoming an MP, and if I do become an MP, I'm going to take up your cause and fight for it. And he said to us that when you've had a tragedy in your own life, it gives you a sort of great sense of empathy for other people and a determination to do something about it. And in his maiden speech in the House of Commons, he invited Fiona to listen to his speech where he promised to do something for them. And I think it's worth hearing that, isn't it?
I believe that it would be right and honourable for Labour, Conservative and Liberal Democrat MPs to change this law together. Because that change would bring comfort to Fiona, console Clara, and would mean that if in 10, 20 or 30 years' time, if there's another little boy or a little girl born in Christopher's circumstances, they might avoid Christopher's fate. That, Madam Deputy Speaker, is why I came to this place. I came here for those who need to move beyond pain to peace.
And you can really hear the emotion in his voice there. And I think, you know, you often hear as a political correspondent, oh, MPs don't care about people, they're not in touch with people. But I think really in this case, my goodness, he cares.
I think there's probably still an unknowable element to this story. You might be able to tell us different, but I guess one of the consequences of conditions like the ones that Christopher lived with is that it's hard to know how many people are in the same position. Do we have any idea of how many people are suffering like this or are vulnerable like this, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a small amount of research on this. It was actually conducted by King's College London, and they found that in a quarter of deaths of autistic people and people with learning disabilities in 2022 alone, that the Mental Capacity Act was not followed correctly. Now, this is essentially just a snapshot of the issue, but the National Autistic Society quite rightly pointed out, how do you quantify something that isn't taking place? It's really, really difficult. And also what this research doesn't include is also vulnerable adults with mental health illnesses who are not getting capacity assessments. Lots of research has shown that people with bipolar and schizophrenia are particularly essentially at risk of slipping through the net in terms of support because, for example, due to the episodic nature of, say, bipolar, for example, you know, a person may be sat in front of you saying, I'm feeling okay in a moment that they are feeling fine and do feel that they could make an informed decision about their own well-being and safety. But perhaps at another point, if they were entering into a manic episode, they wouldn't be able to potentially make the same decision.
Or even engage in that conversation.
Exactly. And so it's really important to note that, you know, although, we focus predominantly on Christopher's story, who's autistic, this does also affect a range of vulnerable adults with other learning disabilities and mental health issues.
And the other thing that we should say is since we aired our report, we have been inundated with other families who are saying, this is happening to me right now. And what unites all of them is that sense that they have been battling for years and years to be listened to and that they are being blocked. And we would also like to say that if anybody has been affected by this and wants to tell us about their story, they can contact us at yourstory@itv.com.
It's such a powerful human story, and you've told it so well. But look, your political hacks, what are the chances that Fiona's going to succeed and there'll actually be a change in this law?
Well, this is interesting because there is mental health legislation going through the Houses of Parliament right now. And this is the first time that mental health legislation will be changed for over 40 years. So the 3 MPs involved, to include the former Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, who are campaigning for this, say that this is a golden opportunity to get this changed. And they have been lobbying the government for this change to happen. And we had the opportunity to put it to the Health Secretary, to ask the Health Secretary directly whether this change would happen.
The issue they're raising, I absolutely agree with them, is an issue. We've got the mental health bill going through Parliament at the moment. It's about to come to the House of Commons. I haven't actually seen their amendment yet, but I'm certainly open to looking at their case because I recognise the issue they're trying to raise.
So a really important acknowledgement from the Health Secretary there. And now we, Fiona, all the other families wait to see what the government is going to do about it.
Well, Romilly and Elisa, thank you both very much indeed. And as Romilly said a moment ago, if you are watching or listening to this and are in a similar situation, then do contact the team here at yourstory@itv.com. And keep listening or watching these quick briefings on YouTube, ITVX, or on any podcast platform to find out what you need to know. Thanks for joining us.